J.Horwich, May 2nd, 2022. Eichmann in Jerusalem. Eichmann in Jerusalem has come to represent the judicial accounting of an individual who embodied a German military and civilian populace dispossessed of any moral compass, together later with an Israeli and international community reminded of their moral obligation to bring such perpetrators of genocide to justice. The controlling legislation and subsequent targeting, abduction, trial, conviction, and execution of Adolf Eichmann were enacted and advanced in a manner designed to promote and at times to refute both elements of that binary. To understand the defendant, it is helpful to first comprehend his position within the Nazi hierarchy, together with his responsibilities, the efficacy of his so-called contribution, his escape, his capture in 1960, and events that followed. As preamble, in 1934, Adolf Eichmann joined the SD. He was subsequently assigned to duties of compiling lists of Freemasons among the first victims of Nazi persecution. In November of that year, he became associated with Section 11112, specifically tasked with addressing Jewish matters. By all reports, he was essentially a mid-level bureaucrat, shunning personal responsibility and sheltering behind the instructions of his supervisors. Initially, he concentrated upon fomenting violence and economic measures by which to, quote unquote, encourage Jews to emigrate from Germany. After the Anschluss, Eichmann was reassigned to Vienna, Austria, where he helped facilitate forced Jewish immigration from that country as well. Following German occupation of Poland and Nazi dominion over its 3 million Jews, it became apparent to the SD that resettlement alone would not be enough to remove these people from the Reich. Eichmann was then reassigned to Reichssecurity Main Office, Subunit 4, Division 4, and finally came to deal exclusively with Jewish transportation matters. At first, his efforts were focused upon moving vast numbers of Jews to temporary transit camps, but there were so many involved that the furtherance of this task involved a holocaust of bullets at the destination, along with improvised gassing units. Because of the difficulty of this process to execute and its effect upon the perpetrators, the Wehrmacht and others, there was a need to move beyond. With that, the natural genesis was the Wannsee Conference, held on January 20th of 1942 in a mansion in a suburb of Berlin. It came to represent the Nazi determination for and execution of the commencement of the final solution, the annihilation of the Jewish community. Eichmann was present. Eichmann was responsible for the notes and the minutes of that meeting. As a newly appointed lieutenant colonel in the SD, he would continue to generate and implement procedures related to the deportation along with the final solution. Interestingly, even during this later sunset of the Reich, mid-1945, in violation of cancellation demands by his superiors, Eichmann continued to authorize transit, in this case of Hungarian Jews, to Auschwitz and other death camps, all at great cost to the German military. After the war, Eichmann escaped first to Austria and then to Argentina. Through the efforts of Nazi hunters such as Wiesenthal, Mossad agents were able to capture him on Garibaldi Street in Buenos Aires in 1960, kidnapping him and forcing his non-judicial extradition to Israel. Upon his arrival there, Eichmann spent the next 9 months facing daily police interrogations. His continual refrain was that he was a mere instrument of his superiors, merely following orders. Indeed, that he was not responsible and as such did not consider himself culpable. Criminal Case 4061, State of Israel versus Otto Adolf Eichmann, commenced on April 11th of 1961, utilizing as its foundation Israel's 1950 Nazi and Nazi collaborators punishment statute, under which Eichmann was charged with 15 counts. These included, among others, crimes against humanity, war crimes, crimes against the Jewish people, and membership in a criminal organization. The trial lasted 56 days. It involved 112 witnesses, many of whom testified from direct experience, having seen what occurred under Eichmann and his supervision. 3,500 pages of police transcripts involving Eichmann's interrogation once in Israel were also present in the documentation. The prosecution successfully demonstrated that Eichmann had been present in Hungary, directly overseeing the deportation of 500,000 Jews, due in part to direct testimony at Nuremberg by and written memoirs of earlier defendants. Gideon Hausner, the prosecutor in Jerusalem, demonstrated that Eichmann had played a significant role in the administrative efforts aimed at corralling the victims, cramming them into boxcars, and shipping them to death camps. On the final day of oral examination, Eichmann admitted responsibility for arranging the transports, but not for the consequences of those acts or their results. He never accepted personal guilt. The tribunal adjourned on August 14, 1941, with a reading of the guilty verdict on December 12th of that year. Eichmann was convicted on all 15 counts. The judges acknowledged that he had never personally killed anyone or even directed the composite activities of the Einsatzgruppen. However, they indicated that he bore a direct responsibility for the deplorable conditions of the trains, the transports, and related crimes. On December 15th, the same court sentenced Eichmann to death by hanging. It was carried out on June 1st, 1962. Eichmann's body was cremated later that day, the ashes scattered into the Mediterranean Sea outside Israel's territorial waters. The trial and attendant media coverage raised public awareness of the Holocaust, particularly among young people. Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion had intended the tribunal to serve as a reminder for these and others, and therein the trial became a tool whereby Israel would refresh the world's collective memory. Ben-Gurion called the trial Nuremberg of the Jewish people. It essentially became a history lesson for the world, insofar as his desire to renew Israel and outside interest in the Holocaust and to promote memory, he accomplished that in abundant degree. Holocaust curriculum for students in Israel and outside flourished. Indeed, the Eichmann trial came to represent a turning point in how Israel and much of the rest of the world would view the Shoah. No longer would the victims be blamed in the retelling of the experience. The blame would then be redirected toward those who were truly responsible, the Nazis and their enablers. Although Eichmann's capture and conviction would produce a resurgence in the quest of post-war justice, together with an interest in the Holocaust and the associated collective memory, it would also uncover an unseemly and banal underside of the Nazi killing machine, along with the attendant inhumanity. Subsequent to Eichmann, jurists and other observers noted very importantly that one does not need to be fanatical or sadistic or mentally ill to murder millions. It is simply enough to be a loyal follower, eager to do one's duty. Through the crafting and enforcement of civilized criminal law and procedures, Eichmann demonstrated how both unexceptional and deadly the perpetrators of genocide can be in the discharge of their activities. Here, a minimally educated, did not even have a high school diploma, and decidedly mediocre civil servant directed the means by which over 60% of the pre-war European Jewish community would be annihilated. Few domestic and international efforts impeded the commission of the related crimes, and only the Israeli judicial system would provide Eichmann's day of reckoning. With the deaths of over 6 million came the limited efficacy of the Nuremberg trials to address perpetrator accountability. With the commencement of the Cold War, even those trials came to an end. This left only the long-arm enforcement provided by the aforementioned 1950 Israeli, Nazi, and Nazi collaborators law. In bringing Eichmann to justice, the Israeli government forced a judicial accounting, together with a renewal and revision of collective memory. Eichmann may have only been a fonctionnaire within an enormous bureaucracy of evil, all part of an even larger criminal enterprise, but he also possessed individual guilt. As such, Nuremberg represented the first chapter in the book of retribution and accountability. This would by no means represent the entire treatise. For that, State of Israel versus Otto Adolf Eichmann would blend its narrative into the composite for both jurisprudence and collective memory.